and interdependent. This means that people should not have to choose between safety, stability, and dignified living conditions and a loss of human rights. Human rights demand policies that respect human rights at the same time that they address the root causes of violence and inequality and offer a sustainable solution. The human rights community is united against coercive policies that eat away at our rights to give a false impression of strong governance, and we're here to tell you more about that. I will now pass the mic to Brian House, Senior Staff Attorney for the ACLU's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here speaking with you all. We're seeing the Trump administration walk back America's commitment to the rule of law and human rights across a startling number of fronts. I'll briefly highlight 3 specific issues that the ACLU has been involved in. First, President Trump has signed a series of executive orders imposing ruinous sanctions on several law firms, including Perkins Coie, Jenner & Block, Wilmer Hale, Paul Weiss, and Sussman Godfrey, that have represented causes or clients adverse to the administration. These retaliatory sanctions and the deals many firms are striking to avoid them threaten to undermine the rule of law by chilling many large law firms from taking on cases that challenge the administration. The ACLU has filed amicus briefs in cases challenging these executive orders on behalf of a coalition of nonprofits committed to the Constitution and the liberties it protects. And fortunately, courts in all 4 cases challenging the executive orders have already enjoined them. Second, President Trump issued an executive order prohibiting U.S. citizens from providing services to the International Criminal Court's Office of the Prosecutor. The executive order unconstitutionally prohibits U.S.-based human rights advocates from speaking to the ICC's prosecutor to give legal advice, expert analysis, and evidence regarding atrocities under investigation by that office. The ACLU has brought a First Amendment lawsuit challenging the order's application to communications with the ICC prosecutor on behalf of human rights advocates focused on the genocide of Myanmar's Rohingya people and gender-based violence committed against Afghan women under the Taliban. Third, the Trump administration is engaged in a nationwide campaign of retaliatory arrests, detentions, and deportations against non-citizens, students, and faculty who have voiced support for Palestinian human rights. The ACLU and its affiliates are representing several of these individuals, including Mahmoud Khalil, Rumeysa Ozturk, Dr. Badr Khansouri, and Mohsen Madawi, in habeas corpus cases challenging their detention. Ms. Ozturk's case is illustrative. She co-authored an op-ed in the Tough Student newspaper criticizing her university's response to a student government resolution on Gaza. For this, her visa was revoked and she was snatched off the streets of Somerville, Massachusetts, and hauled off to an ICE detention facility in Louisiana, where she remains. The government has not identified any evidence against Ms. Ozturk other than her co-authorship of this op-ed. This is a flagrant violation of the most basic First Amendment principles, but it is unfortunately representative of this administration's contempt for the Constitution. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim Wormington, Senior Researcher at Human Rights Watch for Economic Justice and Rights.
Thanks so much. I'm going to talk about the environmental impacts of this administration's first 100 days. Human Rights Watch just published a document titled 100 Harms in 100 Days, including those environmental impacts. The Trump administration's hostility to climate action risks exacerbating the climate crisis and its impacts on ordinary Americans here in the US and also people the world over. 2024 was the hottest year on record globally, and the first year to see average global temperatures exceed 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial. Despite this, the Trump administration has again announced a withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and is using a so-called national energy emergency to increase oil and gas production in the US. The Department of the Interior has already used this emergency to justify drastically reduced permitting procedures that will fast-track the approval of fossil fuel projects, mining, and other natural resources. This fast-tracking will shorten processes that typically take 1 to 2 years to only a few weeks, further condensing the already limited consultation processes with communities impacted by fossil fuels, including indigenous peoples, and giving agencies far too little time to assess the environmental impacts of these projects. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is gutting many of the regulations and agencies that are needed to protect Americans' land, water, and soil. What the administration has called the Environmental Protection Agency's biggest deregulatory action, if fully implemented, will weaken key regulations on the fossil fuel industry, including toxic pollutant releases into air and water. The administration has already issued an official statement granting certain coal plants permission to bypass EPA regulations on toxic pollutants. Furthermore, an announced 65% cut to the EPA's budget will undermine the agency's ability to carry out essential monitoring and enforcement activities. It would also drastically reduce the money available to states for environmental programming. The EPA's decision to close its environmental justice offices and programming will also gut its ability to address environmental harms disproportionately concentrated with Black, poor, and minority communities, including elevated rates of and risks to maternal, reproductive, and newborn health, as well as cancer and respiratory ailments. At the same time, the administration's broader deregulation and funding cuts are giving corporations the world over more leeway to perpetrate human rights harms against the environment and workers. The administration's announced pause in enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, a statute that penalizes companies that pay bribes to foreign officials, will disadvantage American companies that choose to engage in ethical business practices. Cutting hundreds of millions of dollars funding for Department of Labor programs designed to tackle forced labor, child labor, and human trafficking in global supply chains only enables corporations that want to sell Americans goods linked to these abusive practices. All in all, the Trump administration's first 100 days have been marked by an assault on the global agreements, regulations, and agencies protecting Americans' right to a healthy environment. The effect of the administration's policies is to favor oil, gas, and coal companies at the expense of the urgent climate action and government regulation we need to protect American communities and people the world over from climate and environmental devastation. And I'm going to pass now to Hadar Harris from PEN America, who is Managing Director here in Washington, D.C. Thanks to everyone for being here today.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks to everyone for being here. In the first 100 days, the Trump administration has launched a frontal attack on free speech. In PEN America's review of the hundreds of executive orders and other actions taken already by the administration, and our analysis will be released tomorrow morning, we found a through line in this 100 days, a clear effort to chill and suppress free expression and freedom of speech. They're doing this by banning words, criminalizing ideas, restricting learning and teaching, and erasing history and identity. President Trump is doing this by creating opposite land. In one of his first executive orders, he proclaimed his support of free speech and his commitment to eliminating government censorship. But in nearly every step he's taken since then, he's done exactly the opposite. The Trump administration is literally banning words. Now, we all know that language evolves. Of course, the AP style book that you all use has changed over the years, but PEN America has identified a list of more than 350 words that this administration has banned in these 100 days. This includes woman, disabled, pollution, peanut allergy. You heard me, peanut allergy. These words have been stripped from government websites, are being flagged in government-funded research proposals, and are leading schools, civil society, and others to self-censor when using particular terms, like the word female. Restricting learning and teaching. On week 1, the Department of Education dropped 11 civil rights complaints about book banning. The administration called book banning a hoax. At the same time that they're dismissing the banning of books, the Trump administration is telling K-12 schools what to think through executive orders, again in opposite land, purportedly ending radical indoctrination. They're doing that, though, by creating clear curricular restrictions, eliminating what they call illegal DEI or gender concepts. They're interfering with university governance and trying to influence research and curriculum. What we see at PEN America is a campaign against the freedom to read, to write, and to learn. And all of this is part of a broader attack on free speech, which has led to the criminalizing of ideas. There is, and let me be clear here, a serious problem of anti-Semitism in this country, full stop. But this administration is cynically weaponizing anti-Semitism and DEI to shut down speech in multiple ways. They're attacking research, governance, curriculum, and even admissions and visas at universities. They're rounding up people, as we've already heard, for what they publish in a school newspaper or on social media or what they say at a protest. They're particularly targeting pro-Palestinian speech, as in the cases of Mahmoud Khalil or Rumeysa Ozturk, for whom we've also submitted amicus briefs. Even if student speech goes over a line, the universities need to be in charge, not the federal government. And finally, but not finally, the erasing of history and identity. The Trump administration has taken aim at cultural institutions like the Kennedy Center, or gutting or limiting grants through the National Endowments for the Arts or the Humanities. They've gutted the Institute of Museums and Library Services, which supports libraries and museums. And through executive order and action, they're even trying to rewrite history at the Smithsonian. Writers, journalists, educators, and academics will continue to lead the way. Words and ideas cannot be grounds for prosecution or persecution in America. PEN America has stood up throughout these attacks, and we will continue to do so, supporting the lawyers and rule of law who enable us to defend press freedom and free speech, standing up for education, both K through 12 and universities, defending freedom of the press and the right to report. Fundamentally, all of this is standing up for democracy. Courage is contagious, and we will all need more of it in the days to come. I now want to hand it over to Shannon Russell, the Federal Policy Counsel for the Center for Reproductive Rights.
Thank you, Hadar. On day one of the Trump administration, the Center for Reproductive Rights launched our Repro Red Flags Agency Watch initiative to connect the dots between key anti-rights officials and the harmful policies they enact. At the 100-day mark, we're raising the red flag. Your reproductive rights are in danger. President Trump has spent these first 100 days making it more dangerous to be pregnant in the United States, stacking every wing of his administration with anti-abortion extremists ready and willing to do his bidding. Individually, these officials have great power. Together, they'll do long-lasting damage to our democracy and threaten people's reproductive freedoms. For instance, Attorney General Pam Bondi's Department of Justice dismissed a case protecting emergency abortion care in hospitals, making it clear that the administration would rather pregnant people suffer and die instead of having necessary life-saving abortion care. President Trump also pardoned 23 extremists convicted of violating an abortion clinic safety law, including those charged with violently breaking into clinics. And Bondi's DOJ has stopped enforcing these important protections for patients and providers altogether. Marco Rubio's State Department has reinstated the global gag rule, cutting off millions of people worldwide from essential reproductive health care. And HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has partnered with Elon Musk's wrecking ball effort to decimate our nation's public health system. HHS has also frozen millions of dollars in Title X funds, jeopardizing patient health and ripping away access to affordable birth control. This is all just the tip of the iceberg. It's important to note that none of these attacks on reproductive rights are happening in a vacuum. Attacks on the trans community are attacks on reproductive freedom. This was made clear when one of the president's first executive orders targeted trans, intersex, and non-binary people and included language that argued that human life begins at conception, laying the groundwork to give embryos legal quote-unquote rights over pregnant people carrying them. Attacks on the rule of law are attacks on reproductive freedom. President Trump has issued multiple executive orders targeting lawyers that challenge his policies. Lawyers play an indispensable role in holding governments accountable and protecting civil and human rights, including reproductive rights. Over the course of just 100 days, the Trump administration has made it clear that our bodily autonomy and our rights are in danger. For more than 30 years, the Center for Reproductive Rights has stood strong against attacks on reproductive freedom. We will not back down, not in the face of the president's intimidation campaign, and not ever. I'll now pass it to Mark Bromley, co-chair of the Council for Global Equality.
Thanks, Shannon. Good to see everyone this morning. The Council for Global Equality is a Washington-based coalition of human rights advocacy organizations that support local LGBTQI+ issues and organizations around the world. We have a statement on our website that's titled Trump's Scapegoating of LGBTQI+ Persons, Over 100 Days of Shame. Let me just preview it here. In 100 days, nearly all U.S. government programs, funding, and experts that previously played a part in supporting the human rights of LGBTQI+ persons around the world have been terminated. Our statement describes a Trump-led campaign of cruelty that blames LGBTQI+ persons and DEIA to justify staggering efforts to slash development funding, dismantle institutions, including USAID, the world's flagship development institution, and discourage diplomatic efforts around human rights. This includes newly proposed efforts to drastically cut human rights functions and offices in a State Department restructuring. Beyond the loss of U.S. global leadership on LGBTQI+ issues, the Trump administration is now rapidly becoming a leading organizer of global anti-rights initiatives, especially through efforts to deny the concept of gender and to oppose sexual and reproductive health and rights at the United Nations and in other international settings. The destruction and cruelty of the first 100 days may have thrown us off balance, but the task ahead is clear. Even as the Trump administration is rumored to be preparing new executive orders to attack the status of civil society organizations such as ours and the philanthropic funders that support us, much as they already have attacked the funding and status of universities and law firms that oppose them, the task is clear. Civil society movements for democracy and human rights are gathering support and are fully dedicated to the proposition that minority rights and LGBTQI+ inclusion are the hallmarks of a successful, prosperous, and healthy democracy in our country. And with that, I will turn it over to Adam Keith, Senior Director for Accountability at Human Rights First.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for everyone who's here this morning. At one level, there is nothing new about the US government working with autocrats. Previous administrations have often failed to enforce human rights restrictions on security assistance, for example, to partners in the Middle East. But the Trump administration, in its first 100 days, has been taking this approach to a new level and downgrading human rights and anti-corruption concerns in multiple contexts. In El Salvador, the previous administration had some criticism to offer of custodial abuses and widespread arbitrary detention happening in the country's prison system under a state of exception. Now, the Trump administration is actively embracing that prison system, praising it, unlawfully deporting people into it from the United States, and feigning helplessness about its ability to get the Salvadoran government to remedy some of those errors. In Hungary, where democratic erosion has been underway for years, we are seeing reflections of the Trump administration's seemingly broader abandonment of anti-corruption work. The administration has actually removed a targeted sanction on a senior Hungarian official who was allegedly involved in corruption, saying only that it was inconsistent with US foreign policy interests. That removal of sanctions is the only action that the administration has taken so far under the Global Magnitsky sanctions program. On Russia and Ukraine, it is well known that the administration is applying more pressure to the aggressor than to the aggressed in the peace talks that it's organizing. But it's also been slashing US programs that supported war crimes documentation in Ukraine and other important civil society work. More broadly, the impression is out around the world that the US government may actually be an ally to many who are trying to defeat accountability for their actions. Former Filipino officials who were allegedly involved in extrajudicial killings there are openly lobbying for US sanctions against those who've been investigating them at the International Criminal Court, as our ACLU colleague described. Pursuing stability by downplaying human rights abuses and corruption is a familiar approach, but it's sure to backfire even just on the narrow grounds of US security and economic interests. Some of these threats to human rights and other threats may be able to be addressed through litigation, and we have been honored to lead or join several lawsuits in that regard. But others aren't, and it's essential that Congress do more to draw attention to the harms that these policies are being done and try to reverse them. With that, I will hand it over to a colleague at Southern Poverty Law Center, Lisa Borden, Senior Policy Counsel for International Advocacy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. For more than a decade, in the last several years, including voter suppression, censoring of the teaching of truthful history, and even discussion of issues of race, sexual orientation, and gender identity in our schools, and attacks on basic human rights for transgender people. Make no mistake, these changes are directly in service of the white supremacist agenda, erasing history, demonizing marginal do this work as well. Every federal government program aimed at advancing racial equality and justice is being terminated, and efforts outside the federal government are under attack. SPLC's profiles of Trump cabinet members and explainers on the harmful impacts of recent executive orders are available on our Together We Fight webpage. And stand by. Thank you, and I will pass along to Logman Fatahi, a U.S. advocacy representative of the Committee to Protect Journalists.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's an honor to be with you all, colleagues. My name is Logman Fatahi, and I serve as the U.S. advocacy representative at the Committee to Protect Journalists, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting press freedom and ensuring the safety of journalists worldwide. The United States has a proud tradition of a vibrant and free press with strong protections rooted in the Constitution, even as the path has not always been smooth. Historically, these principles have also shaped U.S. foreign policy. Since Donald Trump returned to office in January, CPJ has documented a troubling pattern of hostile rhetoric and actions aimed at vilifying and disempowering independent journalism. These measures span the administration and include allegations of fake news and corruption, mandates requiring the Associated Press to use state-approved language and barring the AP from White House access in retaliation for exercising editorial independence. The pattern also extends further to punitive measures by the Federal Communications Commission against national broadcasters, and executive overreach by the White House in seeking to terminate congressionally appropriated funding for national public broadcasters, as well as international broadcasting networks under the U.S. Agency for Global Media, or USAGM. USAGM networks such as Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and Radio Free Asia were established by the United States to provide factual reporting to audiences denied uncensored information. Today, the commitment to counter misinformation with rigorously reported facts appears to be eroding. The administration's approach of sowing mistrust in journalists and undermining press freedom poses a profound risk, not just to the United States, but to the world. Americans, particularly in rural communities, could be deprived of critical information during natural disasters. People around the globe could receive distorted views of US policies affecting their lives. Financial markets could be destabilized by rumor instead of reliable reporting. Defending a free and independent press should not be seen as a partisan issue. It is a fundamental defense of constitutional governance and First Amendment rights, including freedom of speech. In this challenging moment for democracy, CPJ calls on Congress, the courts, state and local officials, and the American people to respond with unity, urgency, and resolve to safeguard press freedom. Since the Obama administration, CPJ has regularly published reports assessing the state of press freedom and journalist safety in the United States. On April 30th, CPJ will release a new report covering the first 100 days of the Trump administration. Please visit cpj.org for the latest information. I thank you for your attention and look forward to any questions. Thank you so much. And back to Amanda.
Great. Thank you so much, Logman, and thank you to all of our speakers. We've only just started to scratch the surface, or as Shannon Russell said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. As you all are aware, President Trump's decision to largely end foreign assistance has undermined human rights in U.S. foreign policy with devastating impacts on communities around the world. The administration has also demonstrated a dangerous disregard for the lives of civilians endangered by armed conflicts, including by shrinking offices aimed at reducing civilian harm caused by U.S. military operations, by callously discussing the potential civilian harm on signal, by weakening norms and abandoning support for clearance of landmines, and reversing executive orders aimed at ensuring the U.S.'s arms transfers do not contribute to violations of international law. The list goes on, and that is why so many of our organizations have prepared 100-day analyses for the public to understand what has been lost in just these 100 days. Well, what makes these 100 days different from past U.S. policies, which also have sometimes challenged human rights. We will share these materials with all of those who have joined us today. But before we open for questions, I want to make it clear that this attack on human rights is not inevitable. Human rights defenders, journalists, civil society organizations, and many others are working to document and expose their impacts. Popular movements are protesting and they're resisting, and the judicial system has not stopped upholding the rule of law. However, more is needed from our leaders at all political levels, at all levels of society, from all political stripes, to call out, push back against practices that violate human rights, and step up to address their impact wherever they appear. Yes, 100 days in, there has been a lot that has gone wrong for human rights, but the Trump administration can still reverse course. It can recognize the critical role played by civil society, human rights defenders, universities, independent media, in protecting human rights and ensuring accountability. They must allow peaceful protests to proceed and guarantee the rights and freedoms of expression and peaceful assembly, and they must stop targeting those that have independent voices and recognize their essential role in society. And with that, I will open it up for questions. Okay. Let's see. I will read out a question from Chantel from Time. This question is for you, Shannon. Can you talk about what actions the Trump administration hasn't yet taken, but you anticipate or fear the administration will take on reproductive rights in the coming days, weeks, and months? And can you also speak a bit more about the mass layoffs or how the mass layoffs at HHS threaten reproductive health access and healthcare access? Thank you. And I'll pass it to you, Shannon.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for this question. I can take the part about the decimation of HHS first. So we know that, one former FDA employee called the cuts a bloodbath. Roughly a quarter of HHS's workforce has been eliminated. So this includes the majority of the employees in the CDC's Division of Reproductive Health. This includes also the team that was tasked with compiling and publishing data that focused on abortion access, such as how many patients were accessing care, where they were getting it. And so now these 2023 data are just sitting in inboxes and Teams folders. And it really stymies efforts to understand the impact of state abortion bans in the aftermath of Dobbs. We also know that the Trump administration has cut the Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring System, or PRAMS, which is a really critical health program that has collected data on maternal and infant health since 1988. So PRAMS was doing everything from studying SIDS to rates of postpartum depression and anxiety. And then finally, we also have the National Assisted Reproductive Technology Surveillance System. It really provided patients with essential information about IVF and other assisted reproductive technology options. This work really helped to push the medical community to adopt safer and more effective IVF methods. So now that entire division is gone as well. So this is really hampering HHS's efforts to ensure that people are getting quality, essential reproductive health care and that they know their options. As far as what we are anticipating the Trump administration to do in the forthcoming days, I think that we are looking out for things like it's on medication, abortion access, and we are also looking for additional attacks on the Veterans Administration. We know that a rule has been sent to the White House that would instate a full ban on abortion care in the Veterans Health Administration. This would be the strictest abortion ban in the country if it reinstates a full ban. So that's just a little bit about what we're anticipating coming down the pike and also the impact of the cuts on HHS. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Appreciate that. The next question we have is for Hadar. And it just takes me a second to switch between screens. Regarding the list of 350 banned words and phrases, do you foresee that list continuing to grow? Have any terms ever been reinstated? And more broadly, could you reflect on what this kind of censorship means for democracy and the pursuit of truth? And this question was submitted from Isam Ahmed from AFP. Thank you, Isam.
The list of words continues to grow. We have pieced it together from a variety of different sources, and we don't anticipate that words are going to be kind of reinstated in a formal way. What we may anticipate is that if there continues to be litigation and injunctions around some of the executive orders, specifically around DEI or what they call, I hesitate to use their terminology, of radical gender ideology, that there may be a kind of opening to be able to reinstate some of these concepts. But this is definitely a frontal attack. I know I said before a frontal attack, but the ways in which they're trying to eliminate words means that they're trying to eliminate ideas, means that they're trying to eliminate identities, history. Words. It's about banning words, it's about banning books, it's about restricting curriculum, and it's about undermining truth so that there's only one narrative which is favored by the government, which is completely contrary to hundreds of years of legal precedent in this country